Welcome back to The Run. We've talked about past energy policies, good, bad, or indifferent. But what should the next president propose? What would a balanced, resilient, and risk-mitigated energy plan look like? Let's talk about the role of nuclear energy. The average age of a reactor in the US is about 34. Not bad, unless your retirement age is 40, which for a nuclear reactor, it is. The melting of the cores of the Fukushima reactor in 2011 reminded the world of the risks of nuclear power, even in the hands of a technically advanced democratic society. But it's zero emission. It's the bulk of electricity generation in France. And you don't have to wait for the sun to shine or the wind to blow. Nuclear power, good enough for the cheese-eating surrender monkeys. Good enough for the USA? Anders?
Well, Fukushima, Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island meltdowns were the old-style nuclear power plants. Now we have new-style nuclear power plants that are much safer. Americans and people generally around the world have an irrational fear of nuclear power. Nuclear power is a highly energy-efficient, highly clean form of energy, and it really is the future of clean energy in the United States and the world. The world needs massively, is increasing in population. We need a lot more energy in the future, and we're going to be relying on nuclear energy to bring climate change down. Now, when we have this knee-jerk reaction that we see against nuclear energy, we have the closing of nuclear power plants on occasion. When you close a nuclear power plant, it's a huge dislocation to the local economy, and it's a net loss for the national economy. Now, for example, San Onofre nuclear power plant was closed in 2013. We lost
Where's this?
15 in California. We lost 1,500 jobs from that closure, and the local economy lost $400 million in tax revenue. That's a huge loss to the economy locally and nationally.
It would be a much bigger loss if these nuclear power plants that are aging, that are at serious risk. I think the San Onofre one is on a fault line, right? And it's I think.
But it applies to all other nuclear power plants.
No, but they're also they're very old. Many of them. They're applying for
extensions.
They're applying for
replace the old ones with new ones.
But that's not happening. They're applying for extensions.
Well, why isn't that happening?
Can I finish? Because they're privately owned. They don't want to spend the money on building new ones. They just want to extend their licenses that they currently have. And I think the major problem and the reason why there's such a great distrust is because of the lying. We know with Fukushima that they lied from day one, and they're still lying. New information comes out every day about what the true disaster really was. 3 Mile Island, it took forever to get the truth, and we're not sure now if we know it. We've just had an incident up at
I think
Indian
Solyndra was
Point.
lying too.
Solendra's not going to poison the planet, right? Solar energy is not poisoning the planet. So that is the problem with nuclear energy.
Poisons the planet.
That is the problem with the nuclear industry in this country, is that it is private industry. The Nuclear Regulatory Agency is useless. It's all friends of they lie. Are the nuclear plants in France privately owned? Or are they?
The problem is that you
have
a solar fig leaf on a coal-fired energy approach.
That's not my point.
That is what's going on.
You're sidestepping my point.
Address the question. The tail risk, you're asking us to make a leap of faith into a new technology, a whole new generation of plants.
We have a long, old technology
that
been
has
going
been
on
full
for a long
of
time,
lies and lies and lies
over time.
By the way, I want to say something about 3 Mile
No one's
Island.
answered my
Either
question.
the technology is unsafe or it's safe, and it's safe as long as it's owned by the government.
That's not what I'm asking.
Well, but you're asking. So France
there's
owns
so
it.
much money at stake for the private industry of owning these nuclear power plants that they cut corners, they
also
lie
money at stake in the solar industry.
And there's a huge amount of government money that subsidizes these nuclear power plants.
Isn't the tail risk of isn't the tail risk of nuclear far greater than the tail risk of solar?
Well, the tail risk of solar is that we don't actually do something about the coal-fired plants, right? We think we're doing something when we have solar, but in fact, we're really relying on coal-fired plants.
You're back to a climate change argument rather than an actual environmental hazard.
Well, no, tail risk. There's that risk at the tail, but then if it's much better everywhere else in the distribution, then that's not.
As long as you don't live in Japan or on the west coast of the United States with the fish.
I think it's a politically tricky approach, and so that's. I guess nuclear is a very appealing thing to me. It seems like it's very difficult, and we have made no progress on it politically. The nuclear is actually receding across the world, unfortunately. So Germany shut down all of their plants.
In response to Fukushima.
In response to Fukushima.
Complete mistake.
Well, yeah, I agree,
Let
but
me say- let me say something about-
I'm worried about
I want
that.
to say something about 3 Mile Island. The federal government did an analysis of what the effects of the radiation release at 3 Mile Island were, and they concluded it probably increased the number of cancer deaths by 1. So there's this perception that 3 Mile Island was this gigantic disaster, but the reality is you have a fire at a refinery, you have a shipment of solar panels that goes jackknife on the highway. That's as serious, actually, in terms of deaths, as 3 Mile Island was. And 3 Mile Island was the most serious nuclear accident that ever took place in the United States. So the perception that nuclear is dangerous, I think, is highly questionable. In the case of Fukushima, this was a very unusual situation. They put it on the location of a major fault line right by the ocean. So they both had an earthquake and a tsunami. As far as I know, there are no nuclear reactors planned in the United States that have similar risks.
We don't know that. We don't know that.
Oddly enough, there is a reactor outside the United States, the Bushehr reactor in Iran, which is on a major fault line that has had a history of major earthquakes and apparently is extremely dangerous.
No one has yet addressed my point about the lies. That we have had nothing but
No,
lies
lies across
from
the
nuclear-
board. I mean,
but
you're
not
picking on
anything
your.
that
I mean,
People
there's
lie.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
not to the extent that the nuclear industry has, that we find out after and after and after.
don't think that's
and
true.
so, well,
Let me
I
ask
mean,
you
like,
this,
it's-
Mel.
you-
That's
any-
where the
any
distrust of
economic-
nuclear
any
energy
industry.
comes
I mean, you
from.
could say something about, should we shut down the financial industry because we haven't
yes,
figured out what caused the financial
absolutely.
crisis?
We
Yeah,
do
okay,
know
we'll
what
close
caused
all the
it.
banks. We'll
We
close
do
all
know
the
what
banks.
caused
You're
the
asking the
financial
wrong
crisis.
person that question.
We do know what caused the
All the
financial
banks-
crisis.
all the
Melody,
banks-
let me ask you this. If we could figure out what France is doing right and Japan and others
Japan's
are doing...
not doing it right. Talk to a Japanese
France,
citizen.
what France is doing right,
Right.
and what Japan and how they're avoiding the mistakes in Japan and elsewhere. If government ownership, more investment, are you in favor of nuclear done the right way because of the global warming mitigation that it offers?
I think that if that's true, and if it's really proven to be true, then it's an
zero
option
emission.
worth considering. But in terms of dealing with nuclear waste, Japan was always cited as look at Japan, they've dealt with the nuclear waste. Ask any Japanese citizen, and they'll tell you that was never true. So it's about the lying. The TEPCO, a private energy company in Japan, from the beginning, and there's still more information coming out about the serious core meltdown, which they said, oh, no, 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 no. So that's the big problem, is that the lies, and that we don't really know. I mean, if you look at Chernobyl, it's easy to say, oh, that's the past, that will never happen again. But miles and miles of land rendered it habitable for 100 years. Is that
Anders,
impossible
is it-
to-
I-
there are
specifically-
three
let me-
companies, Transatomic, and two more, Martingale and one more, that are dealing with the nuclear waste issue. They are learning
Yes, but we're
how to
supposed to
use
trust.
nuclear waste to create
But they told
electric
us,
power.
Can I-
they
can I
told us they had
answer-
dealt with it already. So
Can I-
if now we're saying, oh no, but we'll get there, that's one that let's just be honest
Jonathan,
about.
respond.
The only reactor in the United States that was ever built that is in any way similar in design to Chernobyl is the Hanford nuclear reactor, which was built by the federal government in Washington State, and it's been closed down. No commercial company ever designed a reactor in the United States at any time that was in any way similar in design to the Chernobyl
But there's
reactor.
several that are the Fukushima. It's a GE reactor, right? And there's
The
several in the
probability
United
of a
States.
mistake is
and that's what's on the
very,
market
very
now.
small.
But
at this point.
isn't Jonathan Leaf understating the tail risk if something does go wrong? Isn't that the lesson of Fukushima, a GE plant?
I think the risk, for me, the risk is low when you multiply the probability times the effect. It's very low compared to the other options. And the cost, the massive cost of solar, the massive cost of wind power, I'm all for experimenting with that and trying to improve those technologies with government subsidies even, but we have to, given the climate change, we've got to think about nuclear. We also have to subsidize new nuclear technologies that are improved, that are cleaner,
and
that
will
are
be
safer.
honest, and that will be honestly explained to the people.
Let's talk about the financing then. Isn't one of the big barriers to nuclear construction, the construction of a new generation of nuclear facilities in the United States, not political pressure, but rather economic pressure, that utilities at the state or certainly the local level do not want to invest such a huge sum over such a long time period when they can just keep adding incremental power through natural gas facilities?
Well,
That's where the
actually, if I
federal
could-
government has to step in and rationalize that process and smooth out that economy for those local.
Jonathan.
Well, it's also Wall Street. It's not just regulators and government. It's also Wall Street. Because Wall Street is unsure what the future price of oil will be, and it sees the price of oil coming down and the price of natural gas coming down, and more supply coming onto the market. Nuclear power plants require long-term financing.
Long-term meaning 20, 30, 40 years.
40 is typical. the bonds that are issued, the underwriting is for long term, and Wall Street is not convinced that they can reasonably make these kinds of underwriting deals at good rates because they don't know what the future
And
price
Wall
of
Street
other
is not
sources are.
pricing in the externalities, right?
That's
That
true.
is
That
where
is actually
government
maybe
has
imposed
to
through
come in,
regulation.
and they
Yeah.
have to put in a carbon tax so that Wall Street is forced to price in those externalities.
And then
fact-
you get the problem in Florida, right? Outside Jacksonville, the nuclear reactor that is supposed to have 2 reactors going that only has 1. And it's privately owned but heavily subsidized by the state of Florida, probably by the federal government, and who knows what else. Utterly shoddy workmanship, lying about that. So there's cracks in the foundation. They go in and fix it. It cracks again. And these are the people that are asking for the extensions on their 30-year-old, 40-year-old. They want an extra 5 years. So it's a completely untrustworthy industry. And the government had much tougher
I think you're pulling an
oversight in the
anecdote and calling
earlier.
the whole industry something.
Well, the
Give
plural
me
of
one
anecdote
where,
is trend.
where it hasn't happened, where every time there's even the slightest risk and they rush to lie. If they rush to say, oh, wait, that might be a problem, we'll deal with it, here's what it is, we'll fix it, don't worry, that would be a different story. But every time it's lie, 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 lie.
Do we have consensus around this table that nuclear power is zero emissions and therefore good for the climate, can be mitigated on the risk side through better technology, which is available and emerging, and simply needs to be financed through a more coherent and centralized mechanism?
I don't know.
Does
because
anyone disagree with
I
that
don't know that
summary?
the externalities could be said to be zero emissions.
Okay.
You know, if we have a huge nuclear disaster, we've poisoned the air well beyond anything the fossil fuels are doing.
Patrick, any objection to that strategy?
No, because I think that the reductions in costs and in pollution that you see that we can count on are vastly outweigh the slim possibility of an accident. I mean, we have to be right. Life is, and it's a balancing act, and you have to consider these things. And so just the fact that there's a scary tail risk shouldn't invalidate the
And I would say
possibilities.
that nuclear development needs to be centralized to some extent, but you also need to allow for decentralized development. For example, all these 3 companies that are private
So
companies. that are
continue to
around
involve,
the- you know.
well, now you're going to lose your left-wing
It's
partner
okay,
here.
I don't mind.
Melody,
I already
last word?
lost her.
And I think that the guarantee of cheap energy is also overstated, because that's another problem with this reactor in Florida, is that because of so many subsidies and they keep going back to the local government, and the price that the people are paying is not what it was promised to be. And that's partly because they've done such a terrible job and they're not running at full power because they keep screwing up the second reactor.
That's our time for today. I want to thank our panelists, Patrick Brennan, Anders Core, Jonathan Leaf, Melody Brooks. Stick with BEN, where jobs come first. I'm Jonathan Funk. We'll see you here next time on The Run.